Hello and welcome to All Schemes Considered. I'm your host, Akash Shah, and this is the podcast where we evaluate the ideas that venture capitalists have recently invested in. As usual, I'm here today with my co-host, Zand. Hello, hello. This week we are talking about Handl, Handl. Its website is at handle.ai. Handle is a company which Y Combinator invested into in 2020. And what they do is they provide an API to convert documents into structured data. So that is to say, if you have an insurance claim, or if you have a lease, or if you have a will, or any sort of paper documentation that you want to turn into structured data for a computer, Handle will handle that in between. Excuse the
Nice.
pun, please. Oh God. What jumps out to me is incredible applications in business process management, especially business process management that interacts between real life and computers. So, you have frontline bank employees that are having people fill out paperwork, or you have insurance claims that are being filled out, or, even those traffic tickets that you get from a cop that pulls you over. Eventually, the government will take advantage of the internet too. So, yeah. What's your first take, Zand?
It's a really important problem that everybody has, right? Like when you converting unstructured or free-form data into a database, when you talk to like a machine learning engineer or a data scientist or a data engineer or anybody who kind of does like database stuff at scale, the vast majority of the work is not like modeling it, like most of these people can come up with a really good solid database model or, training model if you're doing ML. But the hard part is the data wrangling. Like people input data wrong, people mislabel data, people don't put the data in or they make it up. There's all sorts of the really hard part about doing any of this sort of large scale data analysis is just making sure that you have the data in a structured format that's easily queryable. I mean, that so many companies are just people solving one aspect of that problem. And so this is certainly an important aspect of it.
So, we hear about this rise of AI and the rise of machine learning and how computers can automate a lot of processes, but computers are still kind of dumb in that they don't know how to handle bad input or not so great input. And this is a way to get ahead of that, or to make sure that the input is correct and what the computer expects.
Right. And so just to be clear, Handle seems like a brand new company, and they're doing something really important here. They're augmenting. So when you're a company like Handle, when you're doing a lot of like this kind of large scale, like freeform data input, you need to train your models. And I think so. Handle really, just based on their front page and like what they do, feels much more like their actual end game is getting a huge amount of data of real world examples that have been labeled accurately. So the actually giving customers good data is, I could be wrong, but I think it's more of a side effect of the actual plan, which is collecting and training this huge model on a large amount of verified and labeled data. I think, like, obviously as they get more data, they can train the model better and it'll get better and faster at doing this sort of labeling. But the really important step is that if they're first to market, you can create like a data moat, right? So let's say nobody else is doing this yet. Handle does this for a couple of years. They now have 100 million trained labels in a model. That's a huge barrier to entry for anybody that comes after them, because they've created a moat of like well labeled, accurate data, basically. So there's kind of a first mover effect here, where I think that's really, I think what's going to make or break them is the kind of insight that even if they have to use manual labor to categorize a lot of this freeform data initially, that will pay off later, both for them in terms of having a data set and for customers who will slowly start to get more accurate data over time.
So let's dig into that a little bit. You said there's this concept of a data moat, of simply just having data, both the raw data and the structured data, is a very powerful thing to have and a competitive advantage. And it, like, that competitive advantage comes from being able to train a very good AI model. So one example that jumps out to me is how Google spent literally a decade having people fill out CAPTCHA forms and identify various objects on the street, like, find the fire hydrant, find a bus, find the street sign. What does the street sign say? And they're now using that not just for, labeling images on the web, but they use that data set to power a completely unrelated industry known as self-driving cars,
Mm-hmm.
which is, so Google is actually creating that data moat, taking it from one place and applying it to another place, which I think is what you just said about Handle right here.
Yeah, and I think like the early examples of this strategy proving successful is stuff like Google, like Facebook, like Amazon. Like it would be very difficult to start a competitor to Facebook advertising right now, simply because you don't have the demographic data, you don't have the targeting data, you don't have the audience data. Like there's no way that a new company, there's not no way, but it would be very difficult for a new company to credibly mount a competitive advantage against Facebook advertising.
Absolutely.
That moat is there. It's very real. And I think we're kind of seeing this move into more niche moats, like this is very niche service. If they can get that moat established, it's almost not worth it to go head to head with them. Like their end game would be either they become the people in the space and they take home bagfuls of money, or they get acquired by somebody like Amazon or Google who, wants to incorporate this into one of their services.
You say it's niche. I guess you could say the product is niche, like, turning physical documents into structured data.
Mm-hmm.
So the product might be niche, but the applications are certainly not niche.
No, the applications are not niche. Every company could use this. Yeah.
They span every company that has a sales team wants this. Every company, every finance company wants this. Every insurance company wants this. Every consulting firm wants this.
Right. And I mean, this is true even of new companies, right? Like Parsley is a pretty new company, and we could still use this. Like there's even like mostly digital or fully digital companies still have times where they need to ingest freeform data.
Yeah. So definitely powerful. I think one thing that's interesting to me is I think Handle explicitly says that they have a human in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they say this to kind of alleviate the fear that, like, oh, what if the AI gets it wrong? And we've kind of seen this before with Amazon mTurk, which was a way to, share data with the world. Not data, which is what was a way to kind of like crowdsource kind of this boring work. And also with, and so like, not also with, like a real world example of Amazon mTurk being used to augment AI optical character recognition would be like Expensify, which was sending, when their receipts, Expensify is expensing software, very large, very widely used. And one of their killer features is you can take a picture of your receipt and it will extract all the information out and automatically create the expense report for you. Expense reporting is a pain in the butt, no matter how large or small your company is. And so people love this about Expensify. And Expensify had a great, I guess, ML model to extract this information. But when that model failed, they would actually crowdsource the interpretation or the extraction of the data from the receipt with mTurk. And I guess this is like a Handle is almost like this little specific part of Expensify pulled out to every piece of paper in the world.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess so. You're right that it's not niche. I should walk that back a little bit, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I think the idea of using people in the loop is very interesting.
I mean, it's necessary, right, to train your model?
I think it's good for training the model, but I also think it's interesting from a sales perspective because, let's think about who can pay for this, right? Like, how is Handle going to take this to market? Are they going to be a are they going to be a B2C, like selling to end of line consumers like you or me directly? Probably not. It's not like Dropbox where we can really take great advantage of this. Sure, if we had our own personal like receipt management, or if we had some weird process of our own, but Handle isn't going to sell this to like 1 million people so that they can make $10 million. I think instead Handle would be very smart to go for massive companies, like Geico, which has tons of insurance agents. And, if they can close that one deal, boom, you have all that data, you're helping this one customer, and, that company can pay enough to keep Handle afloat.
Keep you afloat, right?
While they continue growing their company. So it's definitely an enterprise sale. And if you think about how enterprise buyers interact with technology, you are rewarded for being cautious in an enterprise environment. Latest and greatest is good, but only if it doesn't break down. So having the human in the loop for me actually demonstrates to Handle's customers that like, yeah, look, we're going to make it fast with the AI, but we're going to verify it with a human. And you can trust that this human is smart and is as capable as your agents. And this is a good thing. It's almost
you're saying that the human in the loop is kind of a soft signal that they're an enterprise company, that they're looking for enterprise customers.
Yeah, I think it's a definite signal, but I think it's also, like if you come at it from the perspective of an enterprise buyer, it feels good to have a human in the loop. Even though for Handle, they need a human in the loop, just like as error correcting for their model. For the enterprise buyer, that's actually a feature, not a bug.
Right.
Whereas, if you were maybe selling to an engineer, and purely an engineer that's only focused on how good the technology is, that engineer would see a human in the loop as like, oh, that's a bad model, or they're not very good at their technology.
Right, exactly.
So that I think is interesting. But how do you sell to these gigantic customers?
Painfully, I don't know. I mean, the enterprise sales plan is, the way you get in, right, is you price your like entry level model at just enough where some manager in the marketing department or the finance department can just put it on the corporate card, right? You say like, oh, our starter tier is $99 a month or whatever it is. And that's kind of, I think in tools like this, that seems to be how you kind of get a toehold into like, otherwise you have like a proper full enterprise sales team. Which
do you think do you think they could do like a credit card pricing to get onto marketing managers team?
They could, but actually they don't seem to be doing that, because if you look at their website, they just have a contact us button and there's no pricing, both of which are hallmarks of like an enterprise sales team.
Yes. Yeah. So for me, I think it's almost they're forced to go. I think they sell to people that want to do digital transformations and people that are looking for huge solutions. So I think their angle is that they go in and they sell cost savings at a huge scale for their customers. Maybe they can sell to the IT team. Maybe they can sell to the directly the team that's like focused on this work. So, the front office team at a bank, whoever's managing that, or the claims agents at an insurance company. But then you got to if you think about how let's use a neighborhood bank, for example. They're all closed right now because we're still in the pandemic, but let's talk about if I walk into my local Capital One bank, right? Who decides, what form I fill out and how that form gets processed? Because whoever decides that information is who Handle has to sell to. And they have to discover that, because I certainly don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know how you go about doing that, right? And it also seems, I can't see their backend, so I don't know. But it seems like it might be a low code, but not no code platform. Like given given their whole kind of homepage blurb, it seems like it's an API that you hit, you know? So I wonder if, like, it doesn't seem like you can paste a document and it automatically gets sent to Salesforce or whatever, unless they have like some sort of interface for building those hooks themselves. But it seems like you very much do need to involve an IT team or a tech team, right? Because you need someone to actually make the hooks to Salesforce or whatever.
I think that's exactly what it is. I think you have to have a technology team involved because it's not something that people can do themselves.
Right.
And there's probably, there's the Handle team probably does a lot of hand holding.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect for this company, they're only doing deals at, I want to say 6 figures or higher, maybe even up to 7 figures.
Yeah.
It depends on how good their founders are at selling, because that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at their kind of customers that use this wheel. It's like NVIDIA, Nestle, UiPath, Mercedes-Benz. It's all big companies, right?
Exactly. But they don't have, they say that they've processed about 2/3 of the way through the month, 1.6 million documents. And that doesn't feel that high.
I mean, that kind of tracks, right? Like depending on what these companies are using it for. Like Nestle, for example, probably doesn't have that many order forms that are handwritten anymore. You know, like a sales associate types those up. So like potentially these big companies are using them for like smaller things that are outside of like a digital workflow. You know, like they could potentially being used. Handle could be potentially used to augment an almost digital sales workflow or something, as opposed to being the main entry point for it.
I do think it's interesting in that, there's been this whole kind of digitize everything idea, in the sense that like when everything is digitized, then you have the data and then everything can interact. So like, if I'm a company and I have all the information that I need, then I can analyze it however. And that's why I want everything digitized. And Starbucks was really into this for a long time. They built software for their iPads that area managers would drive around to every single Starbucks in their location. And then they would like rate things down on that iPad, and everything was done through that iPad. There were few, if any, paper forms. They were very much encouraged to, do everything through the iPad and share everything through the iPad. But that's a big ask for any company. Like build your own platform of digitization for yourself and train everyone on how to be digitized. Whereas Handle kind of eliminates that whole in-between step.
Right.
Their Handle says you can keep your paper and we'll turn it into the data that you need. And then all your other systems can trigger off that data.
Yeah, but there's still a little bit of building, right? Like the next logical step for them would be to have an interface to like Zapier to make those hooks,
Oh, for sure. But they're not, they're probably 2 or 3 years from that.
Right. Yeah.
I think for sure they're 2 or 3 years from that.
Yeah.
Because I think what they want to do is, if you think about, if their biggest selling point is like, we make handling paper documents easier, they want to go for people that have millions of paper documents per month.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to go for gigantic companies that have lots of, either lots of physical locations or lots of there's lots of paperwork that has to be handled.
Yeah. And I mean, the ideal for a company, what?
Lots of paperwork that has to be handled. I get it.
I mean, the ideal for a company like this, right, is like, you want to become so easy for the business side to use that you become completely indispensable. Like a thing that you see a lot with APIs when you're selling in enterprise environments is you have a huge mismatch between who wants the product, who's invested in it, and who wants to make it work, and the team that's implementing it. So, or like that needs to buy in to make it work. So you'll see like, oh, we're all in, we want this, but our dev team doesn't want to do it, or we don't have iteration cycles, and then the deal falls apart, right? So really, if Handle becomes like a Zapier like click and drag, where the kind of person who feels the business pain point can configure the app start to finish, I mean, they become one of those services where like it's 2 years down the line, you're doing a whole like database redesign, and it's the integral service. Like everything in your company runs off this pipeline, or like of one division of your company, sales or insurance review or whatever that you're using it for. And I think once you kind of have that no code solution that's when really you become super sticky, and like you close your sales loop like immensely.
That's true. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like being easy to use will be a huge help in their deal velocity and closing
Right.
fast.
Exactly.
Definitely a down the line thing that they should consider. I think this company is very early, only a year or two old. So probably a
Well,
lot to ask of them right now.
well, and this is the way to start, right? Like the easiest thing to do is
Yes,
just have an API, and then you build on top of that. And it lets you kind of narrow down like the business use cases. You can kind of see where it would be best to apply if you do want to go down the no code route, where to apply it, what are common use cases for it, and then you can always leave the API as like an advanced thing that people can even upsell. Ironically, you could eventually make the original implementation a value added feature, right?
that's true.
So, yeah.
So for me, I think I'm pretty bullish on this company. I think they're going to be around. I think we're probably going to see them raise a few more rounds and either get acquired or IPO, just because if they can execute.
Yeah, like the only real big thing there is, does it work? Like that's really the only thing.
I think they can make it work, just because I don't think they would have investment if they weren't able to make it work. It's more of a question for me of like, can they sell it? Like, and can they get into these companies? Because one of the biggest things that could kill them is if they spend 6 months chasing after one deal that then gets killed.
Yeah. Or if two big ones churn in the same quarter kind of thing.
Yeah. But outside of that, I know, when we do our follow-up episode, I'm very excited for that one.
Yeah, I think it'll be good.
Cool. That's it for me. Any last thoughts, Zand?
No, that's it. I think I'm curious to see Y Combinator, I think, is kind of doing a lot of this sort of like automation. They're kind of investing heavily into it. And I'm curious to see if we've reached a point in like the AI lifecycle, like for software, where it's mature enough that you can kind of base low code, no code startup ideas on it. I think we're going to very quickly enter into this kind of field where people start doing automation for stuff that we wouldn't really expect to have been able to automate before, like document recognition or even like website generation, these kinds of things. And I'm curious to see, given Y Combinator's kind of like field that they've fielded this year, I think that's kind of the direction they're headed as well. So
cool. We'll talk about that on our next episode too.
Yeah.
Okay. See you guys.
Later.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed that episode. You can find me, Akash, on Twitter at akash.io. That's AAKASHDOTIO. Or you can find me at my website, akash.io. This time, dot is not spelled out. Akash.io also has past and future episodes of this podcast, but whatever podcatcher you're listening on should have those episodes too. Catch y'all next time.